I wanted to make this video exactly at the 6-month mark from when the Oculus Quest was released, which was May 21st this year. That would have been November 21st. But between my recent trips, I went to Vancouver a while back to meet with some friends, then Brazil, for the same reason, different friends obviously. And also, as I'm sure you can see, I'm in the middle of arranging a move, so I ended up missing that self-imposed deadline. But it's not that long after that 6-month mark, and odds are the Oculus Quest will be a pretty sought-after holiday gift this year, perhaps one of the hottest ones for gaming enthusiasts. So it's as great a time as any to pose that deliciously clickbaity question. 6 months after its launch, is the Oculus Quest worth it? Look, you know me, I don't like to waste your time. I'll tell you right now, it's worth it. It's very worth it. Now let's see why. First, a little history lesson to get us going, because that's what gets people going, right? Dates and figures. I know what the kids like. Founded in 2012, Oculus VR is a pioneer in consumer-grade virtual reality. 7 years ago, they introduced the world to the Oculus Rift, a crowd-funded PC-based virtual reality headset that raised $2.4 million, which is nearly 10 times the amount the company asked in their Kickstarter campaign. That wildly successful crowdfunding campaign seemed to show that the appeal of virtual reality was much more mainstream than most people would give it credit for. For better or worse, in 2014, the company was bought by Facebook, which injected a lot of cash and attention into what Oculus was cooking up. Obviously, this is me being optimistic. There's a lot of problems with Facebook owning something like Oculus, but this is for another video. Now, their first product, the Oculus Rift, is pretty cool, but requiring a fairly powerful computer to run it, really requiring anything other than the headset itself, makes the experience less straightforward than it could be. Enter the Oculus Quest. Announced in September of last year, the Quest is the long-awaited wireless VR, and I mean true VR that is wireless. We've sort of had wireless VR in the form of things like Google Cardboard or even Oculus's own Go headset, but those weren't so much VR as much as they were ways to watch 360-degree content. You couldn't fully manipulate the virtual world with those types of quote-unquote VR devices, and you also don't have 3 degrees of freedom. One of the hairs on my mustache is going right into my nose, and I'm not sure if you can tell, but Jesus, it's bothering me. As I was saying, with those VR headsets, you couldn't fully manipulate the virtual world, and you also don't have 3 degrees of freedom, and that's a big thing for VR. 3 degrees of freedom, or 3DOF, as it's usually shortened to by the community, means you can fully move in the virtual space as you would in the real one. You crouch, your guy crouches in VR. You can lean close to an object, you can look at it from different angles, you can go on your tiptoes to peek over something that's blocking your view. If you have a decent amount of space, you can literally just walk around, which makes games so much more immersive than anything else you could experience. Obviously, the scale isn't the same, but this right here is the closest thing we have to a goddamn holodeck. And that's really the big difference between something like this and something like, say, Google Cardboard, which maybe you've experienced with. They're still fun, don't get me wrong, but with those, like the Oculus Go or Google Cardboard or Samsung Gear or whatever, you're pretty much limited to looking at stuff around you. You can't really move, you can't really touch stuff. Like the Quest, on the other hand, has controllers. They're called the touch controllers, and these allow you to manipulate the virtual world that you will find within the console. Now, I'm a lifelong VR fanatic, even before I had actually tried it out myself. I just always loved the idea of simulated realities. It should come as no surprise that that is my absolute favorite trope in sci-fi. Now, I had tried tons of VR by the time the Oculus Quest came out. I have a Pimax 4K for the PC, it's somewhere here, and I'm a day one PSVR owner. But as I said before, the Oculus Quest is the first true VR device that doesn't depend on some extra stationary hardware to power its graphics. This and the touch controllers, which come with the headset, is really all you need. That means no wires, which means there's a lot more freedom to do stuff inside virtual reality. Now, of course, that freedom comes at a price. Instead of a beefy PC graphics card crunching the numbers to make up the virtual world around you, the Oculus Quest is powered by a Snapdragon 835 processor, which is literally a cell phone CPU. That severely limits the graphical capability of the Oculus Quest, though if you ask most Quest owners, they'll tell you that the wireless freedom more than makes up for it. And that's even coming from Quest owners who have other headsets like the Rift or the PSVR, which is my case. I much prefer playing on this. In fact, I haven't touched my PSVR since I bought the Oculus Quest, even though there are some exclusive games on PSVR that the Quest just can't match. The Oculus Quest is available in two models, a 64 gig version that retails for $399, that's US dollars, and a 120 gig version, which is the one I got, that goes for $499. It isn't exactly pocket change, I'll give you that, but it's still pretty affordable as far as VR goes, especially when you consider you don't need a PS4 or to update your graphics card to make your computer VR capable, which ends up being the case for a lot of people interested in jumping into virtual reality. That initial realization that your computer isn't suited for VR is almost a rite of passage of sorts for the members of the community who don't already own a hardcore gaming rig. For a lot of people, you can't just jump into VR. You're going to need to upgrade your graphics card first, which is the appeal of the Quest. You don't need to do any of that. You just buy this thing out of the box, you're in virtual reality. Now, whether due to the Quest being far more popular than Facebook anticipated, or because the company decided to start out with a small initial production run, which makes sense, Quests were sold out all across North America for those first few months. It was quite tricky getting your hands on one back then. I had to keep refreshing the Best Buy page again and again and again, and when it came up, there was literally one Oculus Quest in all of Calgary. We have 6 or 7 Best Buys. The one. This one was the one. Now here's the thing about the apparent popularity of the Oculus Quest. No official numbers for Quest sales have been put out by Facebook, which can be interpreted as not great news because companies usually love to tout strong sales numbers for their hardware. If it was going gangbusters, if it was selling in the millions, you would think Facebook would have made an announcement, right? However, tons of VR devs have reported stronger sales for their games on the Oculus Quest than any other VR headset, even considering most said games were ports that had a long head start on devices like the Rift and the PSVR, and they're still selling far more on the Oculus Quest. So even if the Oculus Quest itself isn't selling that much, maybe that's why Facebook isn't putting out official sales numbers, it looks like Quest owners are just more likely to buy software for the device than, say, PSVR owners. At least that's what it looks like. Also, the Oculus Quest subreddit had pretty quick growth considering how little time the headset has been available for. The Quest consistently pops up as a top seller in places like Amazon. Most reviews have been glowing, and it shows up on a lot of best holiday gifts for tech types lists, so it's not that outrageous to assume sales have been pretty strong and likely even stronger during this holiday season. Now, okay, what about the games? Now, a little disclaimer, this list isn't meant to be a definitive best Oculus Quest games list. It's just some personal favorites of mine that really stand out. Now, being that this is a new console, and can we even call it a console? Feels a little weird. A good chunk of the initial batch of games were ports that were, like I said, available on things like the Rift and the PSVR. Now, being that this is a new console, can we even call something like this a console? Feels a little weird. What do you think? A good chunk of the initial batch of games are ports. As I mentioned before, stuff you could already play on a PSVR or an Oculus Rift, with the exception that now, obviously, you're not tethered to anything. And I know this may seem trivial, but some games seriously benefit from that. One that comes to mind is the VR bestseller, Superhot. Superhot is an action game where time only moves when you do. You see all the enemies, but they stay frozen as long as you do too. It's as though you had infinite bullet time. So you use that to your advantage to dispatch enemies in both armed and melee combat. The game is an interesting mix between action and puzzle that can get extremely challenging. And one hit is all it takes to start the level over. So expect to be cursing a lot. Again, this is a game I was familiar with via my PSVR, but it becomes a completely different experience when you can move around freely. I know the game was originally Pancake, which, by the way, Pancake is what VR nerds call non-VR content. Get it? Pancake? Because it's flat. But I can't even imagine what the fun is in a non-VR version of Superhot. This is a game that, while not technically meant for VR, it's meant for VR. Then there's Beat Saber, which is basically a mix between DDR and Star Wars of all things. You have two lightsabers and boxes fly towards you with arrows in them indicating the direction you need to slice them in. And like any rhythm game, you have to do that to the beat of the song. Again, I was a fan of this game when it came out on the PSVR, but the Quest added a lot more mobility to the experience on top of support for custom tracks, something that wasn't possible on the PSVR version, which automatically makes it the inferior version, the one that you can't add new songs. Now, there's a bit of a cat and mouse game going on in regards to that, with the makers of the game pushing updates that you can't install if you have custom tracks, and then you have the hackers going in, patching the game and modding the songs back in. I don't know what the state is right now because I haven't messed around with that. I downloaded a bunch of custom tracks and that's it. I haven't felt the need to update it anymore. It is what it is. Next up we have Job Simulator, which was the first VR game I had the chance to play for an extended period of time, because it was the first PSVR game I ever bought. The game takes place in a world where robots have taken over, and the few humans that still remain have no idea what human society used to be like. So the robots created a virtual reality simulation of the jobs humans used to perform. A lot of the fun in the game comes from the fact that the robots are clearly clueless about the human world, which means their attempts at recreating our extinct jobs are, well, not great. Like the mechanic simulation, one of the tasks you can perform on the cars that come up to your little station is topping up the headlight fluid. It's little things like that. Then there is Skyworld Kingdom Brawl, which is sort of a deck building / real-time strategy game where you put together a deck of cards, each card corresponding to a medieval fantasy military unit like archers and dragons. Then you place them on the battlefield to take out enemy structures and troops. It's not a true RTS in that there's no resource management, which I would have liked to see, but it's still a ton of fun and it can be played online with friends, though strangely no voice chat, which the Quest is perfectly capable of. I don't know. Then there's also virtual reality favored VR Chat, which isn't so much a game as much as it's a weird sort of VR social media environment of sorts. I mean, people manage to create games within VR Chat, but they're pretty clunky for the most part, and a bunch of them don't really work on the Oculus Quest, like the karaoke rooms. You don't hear the music, it doesn't play on the screens, at least it didn't last time I tried it. VR chat games are kind of meh. It's really about hanging out with people in virtual reality wearing weird avatars. Racket NX is one of my favorite VR games ever. It's a mix between Racquetball and Breakout, the arcade classic. You're inside this dome covered in light up targets that you need to hit with a ball to clear the level. You only have so much time for each level, so your swings must be pretty precise. The physics are spot on, so after some time in the game, your brain learns the right angle and speed with which to hit the ball and get those targets. One thing I really appreciate about Racket NX is that the game allows you to load up your own MP3s so you can play to a custom soundtrack, which is a super fun experience. Time Stall is, though a short game, one of the most fun experiences I've had with VR. In Time Stall, you're a human safety officer aboard a giant space cruise ship, and you have the ability to slow down time using special time gloves or whatever. Anyway, those come in handy because all hell breaks loose inside the ship and you must slow down time and manipulate the objects around you to prevent your crewmates from suffering an untimely demise. The easiest way to explain Time Stall is to just go, remember those Quicksilver scenes from the latest batch of X-Men flicks? Arguably the coolest part of that entire new series? The game is basically that. Following that typical Angry Birds try to get 3 stars every level fashion, there's a fair bit of replayability in Time Stall, even though the game is kind of short, but you can replay it over and over to hit extra goals. So there's that. There's a little bit, you can stretch it a little bit more. Then there's Gadgeteer, a game about setting up chain reaction machines. There's both a bunch of puzzles to complete and a sandbox mode should you feel creative. For someone who grew up on things like Home Alone and The Incredible Machine, Gadgeteer is absolutely fantastic. Like many physics-based games, I love that there are multiple ways to complete each puzzle as opposed to having to figure out exactly what the developers had in mind. Gadgeteer is the kind of game that simply wouldn't be the same outside of VR. So that's basically the Oculus Quest. There's a few things I didn't really go into here, like for instance, they started rolling out an update that enables hand tracking, so you don't even need to use these things. However, since the SDK isn't out for developers yet, the games can't really utilize that, so it's kind of like just, you can mess around with the with the menus in the operating system, that's it. Also, Oculus put out something called the Link, which allows your Quest to be used as a traditional PC VR headset, meaning you can play games meant for the Oculus Rift by plugging your Quest into your computer, which effectively turns the Oculus Quest into the Switch of VR. Also pretty much killed all the reasons to own an Oculus Rift. The Rift community was not happy about that because the announcement for the Link came out a few months after the Rift S, the latest Rift model, so they were pissed. I don't blame them. Okay, here's the rub. The Oculus Quest is by no means perfect. It's bulky, battery life isn't that great, and the games, though some look pretty impressive and are ridiculously fun, are running on what's essentially cell phone hardware. And not just that, but 2-year-old cell phone hardware. When you take all of that into account, it's a small miracle that the Quest performs as well as it does. Given that it's just 6 months old at this point, there's no chance in hell a new model will drop anytime soon. So if you're into VR at all, this is the headset to buy right now. But what do you think? Are you a VR enthusiast? Do you have a PSVR or a Rift and you're curious about the wireless freedom that the Quest allows? Or do you just find VR a gimmick that's not gonna last very long anyway? Let me know in the comments down below. Follow me on social media if you don't already. I'm very active on both Twitter and Instagram. I'm often posting a little behind the scenes things here. The stuff that you don't see, it's all up on my social media. Hit me up there. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps the channel out so much. It's insane. And that's all the time I have for today. I'm Izzy and I'm done.